Hello and welcome to the Stacking to Win It podcast for week 9. I'm Big Italy 42 here talking about some top stacks on my favorite ways to attack some GPPs with some NFL stacks here. Starting off with the obvious play. I guess the construction of this one isn't obvious, but the team is obvious. It's the Green Bay Packers, total of 30.5 here in this one against the Colts at home. Aaron Rodgers looks as good as he ever has right now. 67 of 94 over the last 2 games. 572, 7 touchdowns, and no interceptions. He always plays well at Lambeau Field. You've got Randall Cobb, who is questionable for this one. Still hasn't practiced fully. I don't know if he's going to play, but even if he does, he likely will not be 100%. Jordy Nelson hasn't looked tremendous himself, but by default, he's going to see a ton of looks if Cobb is unable to go. 4 for 94 and a touchdown last week. Devontae Adams, though, the popular play that you're going to be wanting to get in really across the board. He's seen 30 targets over the past 2 weeks. I keep going on and on about him, but he just seems like one of the safest options and has big-time upside, too, even if Cobb does go. So, for me, it's going to be a situation where if Cobb plays, I'm going to throw Cobb in my GPPs with Adams and Rodgers. If Cobb does not go, it's going to be Nelson and Adams with Rodgers. You could throw Ty Montgomery in there. Obviously, no James Starks once again this week. But the Packers are certainly a team that you are going to want and need some exposure to. That team total is massive, one of the highest we've seen in a long time. So you definitely want to get yourself some shares of this one. Next up, the Cowboys at the Browns. Zeke Elliott going to be a very popular play for good reason. Browns, one of the worst defenses and one of the worst run defenses in all of football. So obviously he's included in your stack, but I don't think that the Dak Prescott-Des Bryant duo is going to be particularly popular. But this is a team, the Browns ranked 31st against number 1 wide receivers. Dak Prescott with Elliott and Bryant really gives you exposure likely to all the scores that the Cowboys have here. Cole Beasley, Jason Witten certainly are potential guys who could steal away a touchdown or 2 here from you, but they aren't guys with big upside. I'm looking for guys with big upside here. Des Bryant certainly has that. He saw 14 targets last week, only caught 4 of them, but over 100 yards and a touchdown. So these are guys that can certainly put up big-time numbers, team total of nearly 28 points. And I'm kind of racking my brain on the ownership for Prescott and Des Bryant, but I think they're going to be sub 10% here, at least for Des Bryant. So these are guys that I'm certainly looking at stacking and taking advantage of that Browns defense, which is just awful. Next up, the value stack, and I'm looking at the Kansas City Chiefs here. This is a team with a team total of 25.5 points. We've got a ton of injuries. Alex Smith's not going to play in this one. Jamal Charles on the IR. Spencer Ware is looking unlikely to play, not officially ruled out for this one quite yet, but Charkandrick West obviously going to be a very popular running back play, and he's really cheap across the industry. So Nick Foles is getting the start here at quarterback. Jeremy Maclin dealing with a hamstring issue. He hasn't been, he's been average at best so far this year anyway, really no upside. So for me, I'm looking at Foles, West, Travis Kelce at tight end as a solid option for a stack. And I'm really not on Jeremy Maclin this week. Despite the high total, I don't like dealing with guys with hamstring injuries. The guy that I'm looking at here is Tyreek Hill as far as a cheap option. He actually leads the team in touchdowns, not even just among wide receivers, among tight ends, running backs, everybody. I know it's been kind of back and forth committee situation with the running backs here, kind of inconsistent, but Tyreek Hill, very cheap across the industry, 3,400 on DraftKings, 47 on FanDuel, barely above minimum on both sites. And I think he's a guy that could be a sneaky type that you stick in your GPPs that could pay off in a big time way there. So not a guy that's likely to see a whole lot of volume unless potentially Maclin sits out, which it looks like he'll play, just not be limited. Monitor that situation, because if for some reason Maclin sits out, Tyreek Hill is a guy that I'm going to be playing quite a bit. But either way, you can have this stack however you want to do it for very, very cheap this week. So I'm all about that. They're one of those teams that I'm not seeing a whole lot about them, but that team total is really, really nice. Contrarian stack, this one is going to sound crazy, as it should, as contrarian stack, sub 3% guys probably. Cody Kessler officially named the starter here for the Browns. Cowboys, I expect to put up some big-time points on the Browns, which is going to thrust the Browns into catch-up mode, which means guys like Duke Johnson should be able to, hit value. He's only 4K on DraftKings. He's got 19 targets over the last 3 weeks as the Browns play catch-up seemingly every week. So that's a guy that I want to pair in there with Cody Kessler. And while people may look to Terrell Pryor, I mentioned in a previous podcast here this weekend that, I'm looking at Corey Coleman. He's cheap. He's 4,500 on DraftKings, 56 on FanDuel. Much, much better wide receiver than Terrell Pryor, the converted quarterback. So I'm looking to stack these guys. Obviously, this is a deep GPP flyer. These are not cash game options. These are not guys that if you're playing 1, 2, 3 lineups, you're really going to want exposure to. But you're playing 5, 10, 150, however many lineups you play. I do think that this is a spot where the Browns could pay off pretty nicely in catch-up mode. So that's my contrarian stack for the week. And really not going with Crowell or Pryor because I just am not a huge fan of those guys here. But definitely Duke Johnson, Corey Coleman, and Cody Kessler, I think, are interesting GPP options. That's going to wrap things up for Stacking to Win It. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out all the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.